Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another special episode with another special guest, Peter Kerr, frequent guest on the channel. How are you this evening, Peter?
I'm going well, and how are you, bicycle legs?
Yeah, getting there, getting there. Been looking forward to this one. This one is going to be part two of our Midnight Oil chronology. We're going to be looking at the albums from 1990 through to 2022. So let's get straight into it.
Yep.
And the first one we're going to look at is their 1990 album released in February of that year, which is Blue Sky Mining. Now, it was 3 years between albums at this stage because Diesel and Dust came out in 1987. And this was, I don't know, I mean, I feel like this was a little bit more of the same with Diesel and Dust. It was going into a bit more of a smoother, more radio-friendly sound, but it definitely does have sort of crossover with Diesel and Dust. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, first and foremost, they were probably at their commercial peak with Blue Sky Mine. So I think it even went better in the US. In the chart placings, it hit number 20 and UK number 28, Australia number 1. You had the producer Warren Livesey, who's been there right from the get-go across the discography. You could say it's a bit of a son of Diesel and Dust. There are about 3 or 4 album tracks or singles that just got flogged and played on radio. Wouldn't you agree? Blue
Yeah,
Sky
absolutely.
Mine, Forgotten Years, King of the Mountain, and
Yeah,
maybe there are a couple of lesser ones like Stars of Warburton, One Country.
yeah.
But those first 3 just got played and played consistently on classic radio, rock radio, alternative radio.
And
And
still do to this day.
absolutely. So I'll just do a little bit of a deep dive on some of the tracks. So Blue Sky
Mm.
Mine is the opener. If it wasn't so overexposed, I guess I'm a little bit fatigued in hearing it because it just got played so much, and it gets played so much now. I could go shopping in Woolworths and I'll hear it on the piped elevator music. But it's a wonderful song. It's got a Motown feel. You got Garrett on the harmonica. Um, you've got that wonderful Martin Rotzi echoey guitar, and the lyrical content of the song is quite serious. It's about a place in WA called Whittlenoon, where there was an asbestos mine, and it was mined between 1947 and 1966. And it was one of the worst industrial disasters in Australian history, where there was asbestos everywhere in the town. The settlers in this town used asbestos in their gardens, their schoolyards, their roads. And just for folk who don't know, asbestos is a very toxic type of fiber that was used in buildings. A lot of fibro houses in Australia in the 30s and 40s used it, insulation, and then it was found that it causes lung cancer, fibrosis, sort of dust diseases. But this was just a major disaster, and it's really like you're listening to this bouncy, jangly song, but the lyrics are just so dark and talking about something so tragic. So that opens up the album. Then you've got Stars of Warburton you've got Garrett's vocals, very expressive, complete clarity. He's in a different register, and he's bringing in those 60s vocal influences, because Garrett from time to time loves mining back to the Byrds, the Beatles, and all that sort of 60s pop guitar sounds.
Yeah.
Forgotten Years. It's one of their great songs. This is top shelf Midnight Oil. It's one of my favorite songs. Few of the sins of the father are visited upon the son. Hearts have been hard, over hands have been clenched in a fist too long. It's a great, great song, and it's an anthem. And it basically was Rob Hurst writing a story about his grandfather or father's experience with war.
Yeah.
And it's just top tier Midnight Oil anthem. I think there'd be a riot if they didn't play this live, and it's one of my favorite songs. I mean, if you were looking at your U2s and your Simple Minds and all those bands that do anthems, this is right up there. It's just a classic.
Yeah.
Bedlam Bridge, I love it. It's like an urban hymn. It's compelling, it's moving, and it's using a bridge between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor. It's a great metaphor. It's a very moving song. And then King of the Mountain, Bicycle Legs. I always thought that this song was about Peter Brock. And I think half of Australia used to think it was too, until I did my research. And it's actually about a place called Mount Karura, and doing a hike up the mountain and just admiring its natural beauty. So for all the viewers out there, there was a racing car driver in the 70s and 80s called Peter Brock, and he was called King of the Mountain because Bathurst goes over a mountain and it goes around a track. And I think everyone sort of associated this song with this particular racing legend, but it's got nothing to do with that. But it works, I suppose, on both aspects. And then One Country, it's a hymn to the country, one vision, one land, one country.
Mm.
They're the key songs, but there's a little bit of filler.
Yeah.
In the cracks. I don't think it's as strong as Diesel as Dust, which is consistently all the way through a great masterpiece piece of work. This is like a son of that, and it's got some really, really high points, but there is a little bit of filler. What do you think of this album?
Yeah, I think you've summed it up pretty well. I always was surprised that they released Bedlam Bridge as a single, because it really isn't a very Midnight Oily sounding song. So it was a curious choice for either the second or third single. I think it may have even been the second single after Blue Sky Mine. But yeah, I mean, I think you've hit all the high points there. Blue Sky Mine, Forgotten Years, King of the Mountain, One Country, Stars of Warburton. I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, it is an album that has its ups and its downs, but I think I know that my best mate Grant, not our Grant, but my best mate Grant, he loves this album. He flogged it to death in the car when it came out, and yeah, it's a good album. There's nothing wrong with it, but it just doesn't maintain the high that maybe a Diesel and Dust or some of those earlier albums does.
Yeah, I agree with you. Is it hard to be critical or put a critique with some songs where there's a fatigue factor, where the song is just played so regularly, even to this day? Like, talking about, Blue Sky Mine, is it hard to be objective? You know what I mean?
I don't know. If you talk about the three big songs on here, Blue Sky Mine, King of the Mountain, and Forgotten Years, probably the one I'm tired of the least is Blue Sky Mine.
Right. Okay.
That's just my subjective opinion. I feel like in this day and age, Forgotten Years and King of the Mountain get played on the radio more often. Blue Sky Mine was the big hit. And yes, this was very much sort of their commercial peak in the United States, even more so than Diesel and Dust, I think.
100%. And we should do a shout out for a very special concert that was done impromptu in front of the Exxon building in New York. Yes. Check it out, folks. It's a high point of the Oils at their finest, just protesting. I think they're on a flatbed truck putting the band together, and they just do a set, and it's kind of spotlighting a few songs off this album. Yeah,
and that has the backdrop behind them that says Exxon makes us sick. Midnight Oil makes you dance. Exxon makes us sick.
Yeah.
And that's an excellent segue into Midnight Oil's first live album, which I've gone on record as saying that this is my favorite Midnight Oil album. We did a panel here a few months ago where we picked bands where your favorite album by them was a live album, and this wasn't my main pick, but it was an honorable mention, and that is Screamin' Blue, This was released in May of 1992. It covers concerts from 1982 through to 1990. So it's a bit of a compilation live album in that respect. And the reason I said that was a great segue was because there actually is a Progress. The version of Progress on here is from that Exxon Valdez show that they did outside the Exxon Valdez building. But this album, you know, Midnight Oil, to me, as wonderful as their studio albums are, and they have done some absolutely brilliant stuff in the studio, to me, they are first and foremost a live band. You've seen them a number of times. I'm sure you'd agree with me on that.
Oh yeah, it's like being in a church between preacher and the congregation. It's wonderful, the connection. They're just one of those few Australian acts that have such a close connection with their audience. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
that Exxon concert, just finalizing that point,
mm.
was such a talking point, and I didn't think it did them any harm in America in propelling Midnight Oil even further.
Yeah. I think that's I mean, that's a fair point. But when you listen to this live album, Screamin' Blue, you can almost hear the sweat dripping off Peter Garrett's head.
Yep.
As he performs. And, you know, it's a great selection. There's some big hits in here, but there's also some deep cuts. You know, it's not all it's not a greatest hits live album. Although you've got things like Hercules and you've got things like Beds of Burning, you know, but you've also got things like Screamin' Blue, the title track.
Yeah.
You know, which is a sort of a deep cut off the 10 to 1 album. You've got Sell My Soul, which is a not well remembered song from Diesel and Dust. You know, it's not one that gets talked about a lot. You've got a wonderful version of Stars of Warburton on here. You know, you've got Progress, as I say, from the Exxon show. You've got Only the Strong, another 10 to 1 song that just doesn't really, you know, isn't one that gets played on the radio.
Yeah.
But you know, and the versions on here too, like some of these really do outstrip the studio versions. And I know that this might be a bit of a bone of contention, but I think the version of Sometimes on here just absolutely kicks the Diesel and Dust version. It's much more energetic and up tempo, and it's just really, really good. That's the version of Sometimes I tend to go to if I want to hear that song. But yeah, and I mean, I've also got a little bit of a parochial thing for this because some of these were recorded right here in Brisbane at the Boondall Entertainment Centre.
Right. So, Sydney Entertainment Centre, I believe. Maybe Melbourne Festival Hall, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, there's some from Capitol Theatre in Sydney from 1982.
Yes, that would be the Triple J concert, which you can see, folks, on YouTube.
Yeah. There's an absolutely kick-ass version of Powderworks from that show on this album.
Yep.
Yeah, highly recommended. If you haven't listened to this live album, you do yourself a favor because it is just prime Midnight Oil for me.
Yeah. And the album cover is great. It really sums up Midnight Oil because they're all part of the surf. You know, they were like a surf band, so a little bit of you know, connection there.
Yeah.
All right.
So then we get into an album that you and I have done a show on before on your channel, which is Earth and Sun and Moon. And I'm so grateful that you got me to do that show on your channel because this is an album that when it first came out, it didn't really connect with me. I felt like it was a bit of it, you know, I felt like they were going through the motions. It didn't really connect. I went back and re-listened to this album several times to prepare for that show. And I got a new appreciation for this album because this, to me, is their 60s album. This is where they really dip into those 60s influences and get even a little bit psychedelic at times. And Yeah, it's a great album.
It is. It didn't do as well internationally, and it was probably the start of the decline for Midnight Oil overseas. And maybe it only went to number 2 in Australia. So I think the tides were turning. There are a lot of people were going to different alternative acts. But I love this album, and I think it's just gone up in my estimation, like yourself. There's just so many great tracks. I think this is kind of top shelf Midnight Oil. Feeding Frenzy starts off, it's got that real R&B swing to it. You've got the Jim Mogini keyboard stabs, and it's got a little bit of a 60s feel to it, as you've said. And then My Country. That only went to number 52, but that's an anthem. It's heartfelt lyrics. It's great melodic hook, but the lyrics are very cynical about people who use patriotism for the wrong way, in the wrong way. It's really hooky. It's an anthem. Renaissance Man, Peter Garrett, it swings. He's got his harmonica. Earth and Sun and Moon. Trujanini, hope I pronounced that right. I always get that wrong. That was the only single Bicycle Legs that had a little bit of airplay. I think it went to number 10. It's got a beautiful hooky chorus, and you've got the wonderful Rob Hurst with his tenor backup. I think that's a highlight off the album. Drums of Heaven, Outbreak of Love, Beatlesque, that plays to the 60s. It's haunting, it's melancholy. And I wrote down when we did the show, I think John Lennon could I was sort of envisioning this is sort of like a John Lennon composition, like Across the Universe, Psychedelia, In the Valley, Tell Me the Truth, Now in Neverland. Look, 60s psychedelic, jangly, talking about different topics are a little bit outside the wheelhouse, more, a lot of matters of the heart. They're still doing their usual template of eco warriors and injustices and social politics, but a lot more of the heart on this album. So very underrated.
Absolutely. I mean, Truganini, as you say, that single, did get into the top 10 just. And I mean, as much as Midnight Oil sold a lot of records, a lot of albums in Australia, they weren't a big presence on the singles charts. They had probably maybe 4 or 5 songs that really got high up into the singles charts.
Power and the Passion's probably their biggest seller, because that was that hit number 7 or 1, and that was like in the top 40 forever. That's the one that comes to my mind.
Yeah. But I mean, there's some wonderful songs here. Tell Me the Truth. I really think that's an underrated gem on this album. And Outbreak of Love, as you say, that's almost got that bit of a psychedelic feel to it, which I really, really like about this album. And the title track, just a beautiful, almost folky song, which I really, really love. My Country, again, as you say, it didn't do well on the charts, but it's become a sort of a Midnight Oil classic in retrospect.
It is, and it's an anthem, and it really rousing every time they pull that out for the live shows. And they pulled that out. They played about 3 or 4 tracks from memory in their very final concert, and that sort of gives you an indication of how Midnight Oil regard this album.
Yeah. So then we get on to what I'm going to claim, and I don't know if Peter's going to agree with me or not, but I think this is the underrated gem in the Midnight Oil catalogue, and that is 1996's Breathe. This album did not do well. I remember the lead single, Underwater, getting some radio airplay, but I mean, the singles didn't do well off this album. The album went into the charts fairly high, but it went out of the charts pretty quickly. But this is a really unusual album in the Midnight Oil catalogue, because I feel like this is the most laid back they would ever sound. They're really getting swampy on this album, and I love that about it.
Yeah. It's very introverted. It's really pulled back. A lot of people think it's in some aspects it's a return to the oils styles, and I played this a lot because I sort of had to reacquaint myself with this album because it's an album that I didn't really in the day play a lot, to be quite frank, but that's fine. A lot of fuzz guitar. There's a lot of fuzz, and like Underwater, it starts off with this deeply fuzzy guitar line, and it's stripped back, and it's got this great organic style. And there seems to be a bit of a theme in this album. A lot of ecological topics are being discussed. Like Underwater, it's all about the premise: can nature be broken down? Can nature be defeated? And it's a typical Peter Garrett lyric where he poses questions, perhaps answers some, and makes you think, the listener, one of those sort of songs that you sort of have to reflect. And then you got Surf's Up Tonight, and it's a wonderful song. It's just basically an ode of the lads getting their boards out in the moonlight and having a dip, taking the surfboards up. Nothing much more. It's kind of very economical on the lyrics, on the words, which is quite different for Midnight Oil, and it's quite effective. It's just about a couple blokes being at peace with nature and just doing what they like to do. Then you've got Common Ground, which is like a plea to humanity. Time to Heal starts off with this sort of introspective. It's got kind of an alt country feel. And it's funny that we talk about alt country because there's a lot of songs that are very much going into that direction, Bicycle Legs. Like you've got one called One Too Many Times, and it's a Rob Hurst number. And I wrote down Neil Young. It felt like it could be on a Neil Young album. And then you have the wonderful ballad with Emmylou Harris, which is the high point for me, the duet, Where Is Home? It's haunting, it's melancholy, it's a beautiful song. It's full of texture and full of atmosphere. And was that the single?
A single?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. No, the two singles that I remember were the first two songs, Underwater and Surf's Up Tonight.
Well, it should have been. It should have been a single, and I think it would have done quite well as being something a little bit different. Because in 1996, sonically there was, I don't know, the music industry was just in a really weird space, and I think it would have been a lot of alt country was starting to build up a little bit of momentum. I think, personally, if I was in the record company, I would have picked Home as the single because that's the strongest track. A little bit of a shout out to the track Grave Trash, is it what it's called?
It's Gravel Rash.
Gravel Rash, sorry, my writing. Instrumental, love it. It's a lot of fun.
It's really good. I love that too. This album to me is very it's oceanic, not just because the first song's called Underwater, but just the whole feel of this album and the sound of it is very, and even the cover, it's got a big sort of fish on it. The back cover's sort of a watery background. It really has that sort of a nautical, not nautical as in shipping or boating, but just, very oceanic feel to it, this whole album. But Sins of Omission is a song I think we have to talk about. I really love that song. Again, a bit of a 60s feel to it. But and then E-Beat is another song that I think I really, really like. It's got a really unusual sound to it.
Yeah.
I think, as I say, this is really the undiscovered gem in the Midnight Oil catalog. Probably most people who are familiar with Midnight Oil don't know this album, and they should.
Yeah. I probably don't have as strong feelings as you do, but I think if I, as I said, I've only been recently reacquainted with it. If I gave it more of a spin, I think it's got a slow burn approach to it. Interesting, three of the tracks were actually recorded in New Orleans. So they were sort of looking, I think, as well as it being an ocean and ecological type of album, I'll say it again, there's a lot of this alternative country feel to it. And I think it's the sort of music that Peter Garrett does groove on. And certainly he was embracing some different influences, a little bit of R&B. But from a performance perspective, it's like Red Sails on the Sunset was like an eons ago. There's no studio trickery. It's just completely organic and natural.
Yeah.
And I read an interview with Garrett. He doesn't like rehearsing and he doesn't like doing multiple takes. So I get the feel Bicycle Legs on this album, it'd be just one or two takes and that's it,
Quite possibly. Yeah. So then they go from probably their most laid back sounding album to their angriest sounding album, and an album that divides a lot of people, including Peter and myself, and that is Redneck Wonderland. This album came out in 1998 and the sort of background behind this album was between Breathe and this album, there was a political happening in Australia with this politician by the name of Pauline Hanson, who's a real sort of right-wing, sort of nationalist, anti-immigration, anti-Indigenous people, real right-wing populist. I think that's the term I'm looking for. And she was really becoming big, especially in 1998. Here in my home state of Queensland, we had a state election and her One Nation party won 11 seats in that election. It was really tumultuous times in Australian politics. And this was Midnight Oil's reaction to that. It's savage, it's vicious, and it's angry.
Yeah, and it's a little dull. I'm sorry, but I think this is a bit of a misstep for Midnight Oil. As much as the lyrics were, they've got their sharp wit, it's very powerful. Lyrically, I can't fault it, but I'm just going to focus on the sonics. I find this melody-free, abrasive, it's rough sounding, and they're using all these electronica techniques of the day, which to 2023 years sound very dated. So they brought in Magoo, who was fresh off the back of Regurgitator in Unit, and a lot of different bands where he was like the ARIA producer of the year. He was like the Golden Boy, Girling and Custard, to name a couple. And all the way through it, you've got this very abrasive, hard techno sound. You got like on the bass lines or the drums, even though Rob Hurst is drumming. But to me, I've played this a few times. I don't like it. It's just too abrasive. It gives me a headache. It's just melody free. There are some moments like an island in the middle of the, a palate cleanser where there is, some relief. Drop in the Ocean where Garrett's with the piano and he's direct emotional raw. And it's got a mix between I put down Brian Wilson and Burt Bacharach. I mean, it's right at the end of the album, and he actually played this in one of the final shows. It's heartfelt, and it's just a beautiful song. But look, just starting off, you got Redneck Wonderland. That starts off the album. It's techno drum beats, and it's just got this one droning riff repeated over and over. Then you've got Concrete, which is like new metal vocals. Cemetery in My Head. That's kind of not bad. That's like a traditional Oil song. So that's a bit of rousing relief. You go, oh, the Oils are back. It's back to the old sound. Safety Chain Blues. Garrett's vocals are just processed. It's Return to Sender. You've got this funk beat and Garrett's just crooning in this really loud voice. Blocked. You've got this spoken word rap over a new metal. The Great Gibber Plane. That's a bit acoustic. Seeing is Believing, which is surf rock. Um, look, I could go on.
Yeah.
I'm not a look. It's not a dud. It's got some really good bits in it, but by all standards, it's far not on par with the rest of their discography. So I'm
No.
sorry, I'm not a believer on this one. I think it's a
Yeah.
misstep.
Well, that's fine. I mean, I disagree with you because I actually quite like this album. I feel like it was what it needed to be at the time. It sounded vicious. It sounded angry, and that's how they felt, and rightly so. Because this political movement that had sort of sprung up between 96 and 98 was absolutely the antithesis of everything that Midnight Oil stood for. And I think they really wanted to make a statement about that, not just in the words, but in the music as well, and the way it sounded, and that's fine. I mean, I like Redneck Wonderland. I love the fact that song is just relentlessly, mean, vicious sounding.
It's a bit banal.
I love White Skin, Black Heart, which again, a song really about racism. And I love the way that Peter Garrett's vocal, he sounds like he's this close to the microphone,
Yeah.
You can hear you can hear him almost whispering into the microphone.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
U2 Pop, did you like that album?
Yeah, no.
That's what I think this album it reminds me of, where U2 just push it too hard and the technology just took over and they just lost the ability of what made U2 so special. This kind of reminds me of that sort of album where they're just so mesmerized by the technology, they just forget what makes Midnight Oil, and they're just losing themselves. To me, it's just embracing the technology. And in 2023, you listen to a lot of it and you go, oh, it sounds very 1998. It sounds very dated. I kind of wish if they wanted to be angry, and I agree with the sentiment, it had to be angry, had to be a bit of a protest, but drop the technology and just strip it out and make a hard rock album. Go back to No Head Injuries, or go back to Midnight Oil, the first album, Place Without a Postcard, go back to that post-punk. But by just embracing all this technology, it just feels very, I don't know, they just were losing themselves a bit.
No. I mean, Hunters and Collectors were embracing technology around this same time too, and I love the Cut album.
No, I don't like that either. Maybe that's probably sums up why, where I'm coming from. I'm not a big fan of that. But anyway, do we agree? Drop in the Ocean, that is a definite high point.
It's a beautiful way to end the album. Absolutely. So then we get another live album, which is The Real Thing. And this is basically Midnight Oil's unplugged album. What you have on this is there's a cover version of Russell Morris's The Real Thing, which was a huge hit in Australia in the late 60s, produced by Ian Molly Meldrum. The original version was. Midnight Oil do a cover of that. And then at the end, they do another studio track called The Last of the Diggers, which is another one of their songs about, returned veterans and that sort of thing. And in between, you basically have an unplugged set, some of which I think was in fact recorded for an MTV Unplugged episode. And again, same with the Screamin' Blue live album. They don't just go for the big hits on this one. You do have your US Forces and your things like that, Dead Heart. But you've also got things like Tin Legs and Tin Mines. And, you've got things like Feeding Frenzy. You've got a beautiful version of Warrakerna from the Diesel and Dust album. So, it's a great mix again of, hits, because you've got your Truganini, you've got Blue Sky Mine and things like that, all the familiar songs. But then you've got these sort of deep cuts as well, and all done in a stripped back acoustic sort of setting. And it kind of gives the songs a different perspective, you sort of hear them in a different way.
Yep.
Some of them have like a little string quartet with them, and yeah, they're really, really good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Look, I'm familiar. I don't have this album, folks, so that's why I just deferred to Bicyclelegs. But I was familiar with The Real Thing, which to me I thought was okay.
mm,
Um, I mean, the original is just such a great song, and if you were going to do a version of The Real Thing, you'd have to really turn it on its head and do a unique interpretation. And Peter Garrett, I have to say, and Midnight Oil do a unique interpretation. But yeah, look, that's one I will have to pick up down the track.
yeah, definitely. I think they're really good different versions of the live stuff on here. It's interesting to hear Midnight Oil in a sort of an acoustic setting, because you know
Yeah,
that normally live they're just such an electric band and such a high voltage band, that to hear them in these stripped back versions really gives you a different perspective on some of these songs.
yeah, absolutely.
So then we get what we thought at the time was going to be their last studio album, because they broke up after this. And that is 2002's Capricornia. This has got a different cover, the vinyl, when they re-released it, than
I've
the
got that
original
exact.
CD had.
I've got the same thing.
It's a great album, though.
Mm. I I think it's the themes of this album are very much with the land.
Yeah.
There's so many different stories, or the lyrical contact is very much with here we are, we're Australians. What is our relationship with the land? It's very much, it's even more in some instances of an ecological album than Breathe. And I thought Breathe was like the pinnacle of Midnight Oil on that particular topic. But stylistically, I'll go, you've got the Golden Age, which sounds like it's got that Birds jangly guitar, and with that little bit of mix of surf music, because, Midnight Oil guitars, they
Mm.
are so influenced by surf music. And, it's so apparent when you see Midnight Oil live, when you see the interplay of the two guitarists, Rotzi and Magini. They love that, doing all those little surf music licks. It's summery. It's got that nice harmonizing, and you've got the pulsating bass of Bones Hillman and the drumming of Rob Hurst. Is this the golden age, or are we short of the golden age? That's what it's asking the question. And it's a really rousing, opener to this album. Capricornia, it's classic songwriting. It's classic Midnight Oil songwriting. It's got that beautiful melody and the hooks between the verse and the chorus. A Crocodile Cries. I like it. It's an instrumental. I wrote, it's like a glacier that floats in an ocean of sunny songs. I borrowed that off someone, but I thought I'd throw that in. World That I See, full of optimism, sunny. It's a mid-tempo rocker. There is no end to the world that I see. It's about the land, man's relationship with, the environment. Poets and Slaves, it's a plea for the welfare of the country. You've got to arrest the decay. You're sinking in the bay. It's got this sparse arrangement. It's got a beautiful separation of instruments. It's got a passion for change. So they've still got that driving passion across the songs. But to me, the theme of this album is very much of the land. And that's kind of, you could sort of see the hint from the get-go when you look at the album cover, where it's got the cattle.
Yeah.
You're going to have something that's a little bit more earthy and less more of the world stage. So can you see a little bit of a trajectory with Midnight Oil? So when they're at their peak with Blue Sky Mining, and then Diesel, and, well, say Blue Sky Mining, that was like about the world. It was still Australia, but a lot of the lyrical content was outside Australia. It was like more universal. But over this period where you've got Breathe and Capricornia, and especially Red Knight Wonderland, it's sort of like the themes are kind of shrinking, and it's more about our country and where we're at, less universal.
Mm.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think as they sort of realized that their overseas career wasn't, that it had reached its peak with sort of blue sky mining, I think they sort of drew back into, I don't want to say parochialism, but they drew back into what they know best, which is Australian themes and Australian topics. And the music reflects that on this album, I think, too.
Take it or leave it, because I think, I really think, I mean, it just shows how uncompromising and how, they could have sold out and just wrote songs about Mandela and whatever that was topical in the day, apartheid or whatnot. But they thought, no, we've done that. Let's take it back and let's just talk about our backyard, and then the world can come to us.
But yeah,
compromising.
Yeah, absolutely. And this album is a very Australian album. As I say, it doesn't musically, for me, it's a little bit here and there. It doesn't have a unifying sound throughout the whole of it. I feel like they're sort of taking bits from various parts of the Midnight Oil catalog, and that's a fine thing to do. But it makes this album different from pretty much anything else in their catalog in that respect, for me anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, after this, they would go on this very long hiatus while Peter Garrett pursued his political ambitions, ended up becoming a minister in the government here in Australia. And then when that career was over, not long after that, Midnight Oil would be back. About 2018, 2019, they started touring again. And then 2020, we finally got new music, and we got the Makarrata Project, which was the first of two albums that they recorded pretty much all at the same time. But this was the first one to be released. And this one very much, I mean, the whole theme of this album is, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander themes, rights, things like change the date, Australia Day, which is, the day of European settlement. And for some reason, we think that's, something that Indigenous people should be able to celebrate. But no. First Nation, Gadigal Land. I mean, there's so many good songs on this album. And sound-wise, this is a real return for me to that sort of Diesel and Dusty kind of sound for Midnight Oil.
Absolutely. It's punchy, it's vibrant. I think it's a fantastic album. It went to #1. It's a collage of spoken word, sounds of Indigenous culture, music. It's just a potpourri of culture and just everything that's about our country. And that First Nation song, it's got a bit of a groove to it. We've got to start the conversation, end the exploitation. And you listen to it and you go, Midnight Oil are back. This is it. It just brings a shiver up your spine. And it's got an all-star cast. You've got Jessica Malboy, Tasman Keefe, just a variety of different performers. Gadigal Land, I love that. The rousing lyrics it's built on this really sturdy rock riff. And you've got the wonderful horn section making a return.
Yes.
I love it when the horns come back into a Midnight Oil, and it just makes the song soar. Change the Date, piano voice Garrett. There's a fragility of his voice. Sometimes you hear it cracking, but I think it's wonderful. It brings more emotion. It's direct, it's heartfelt. And, this pretty lilting piano line that just sort of shines. Terra Australia, Alice Skye. I really like that track. It's got a kind of a Beatlesque, I keep on referring back to Across the Universe, but it does have a feel about it. Beautiful ballad. Desert Man, Desert Woman, featuring the warm vocals of Frank Yammer, I think it is.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wind in My Head. It's kind of gospel and it's all rousing. It's a rousing record. To me, it's like Midnight Oil's gospel record. That's what I reckon it is. It's a gospel record.
It's a wonderful return to form. You know, after so many years away, they came back as if nothing had ever, you know, as if they'd never been away.
Yeah, absolutely. And a fantastic swan song for Bones Hillman.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, he would pass away before the next album was released, although it was already recorded. So Bones is still on this album, the final Midnight Oil album, at least as far as we know.
Yep.
Resist.
That's another cracker of an album. Came out in 2022, their 13th. You got Warren Livesey again on the Twiddling the Knobs. Went to #1, and deservedly so. And it starts off with this cracking opening track, Rising Seas, a Jim Mogini effort. It's a banger of a track. It's classic Midnight Oil. It starts off with Garrett supported by the Mogini organ, and then the guitar, bass, the metronomic drums come in, and you go, oh, classic Midnight Oil. Temperature rising, climate denying, nobody's listening, buildings up in something. It's fierce, it's full of kinetic energy. And you've got this little jangly guitar all the way through. It's nice. I think it's a great song. Barker Darling River, like that song too, harks back to early Oils, circa 1980. No head injuries, I reckon. The guitar drives it along with Hurst thumping away. He's drumming, even, you know, like late into his career, is just superlative. He is like the engine room, the heart and soul of this band. At the time of writing, that is a little bit of a kind of a crowd sing-along. You can imagine the fists are in the air and the crowd sort of singing in a communion. Like Nobody Child, beauty, love, and compassion. Look around the world, cause nothing less will do. This is about Jim Mogini. He was an adopted child, and he wrote that wherever you come from, you don't forget the important things in life. And this is what this song is about, Nobody's Child. It's a lot of people have said this is like a spiritual successor to Outbreak of Love from Earth and Sun and Moon, and I tend to agree. I like this song a lot. Reef's a great song. Undercover. We Are Not Afraid. That's another one. I mean, Peter's vocals on this album are really, really fine. And it's got a different sort of tonality to the early Peter. He's actually kind of using different sort of timbre in his voice. And it's mature, this song, in his vocals. It's haunting, it's knowing, and it has a wonderful string quartet, you know, cello, violin, etc. And it's a cautionary tale about the future. There's a dark cloud on the horizon, and it's coming close every day. We are not afraid. We must be fearless. And it's, again, you know, you were talking about Redneck Wonderland being angry about the times. There's a little bit of anger in this this particular album with the politics of the day or the government of the day and the, you know, apathy of a lot of leaders to, you know, pull your finger out. So you can see a lot of that in the lyrics, and that's We Are Not Afraid is like a call to arms, you know. Get into it. So what do you think of Resist? Sorry, I've been blabbing along.
No, that's fine. I think it's a good album. The only thing that I might say about this album is it's a double on vinyl. It's a little long. You know, it's longer than pretty much any of their other studio releases. And, you know, I might have preferred this album if it was sort of, you know, a punchy 40-45 minutes. But other than that, it's a great album. But I like, of the two comeback albums, I probably lean towards the Macarata Project rather than this one.
Well, the Macarata only goes 33 minutes.
Yeah,
it's got 8 tracks. Yeah. So that's really kind of punchy. But I'm just wondering, did they just put a lot out because, well, we're a Midnight Oil now, Bicycle Legs. As a live entity, they're finished. As a recording outfit, I reckon they may have something left in the tank, but this could well be their swan song. So that's why it may be a little bit longer. and there's a little bit more material than you would normally get on a Midnight Oil album, just
Yeah.
to put that final statement.
No, I understand that. I think they'd recorded 20 tracks, split them up into the 2 albums. And that's just how it was. And they wanted to get all the songs out. And I understand that. But yeah, it's still a good album. I don't think there are any bad albums in the Midnight Oil catalogue. But yeah, I just think this one is, maybe it would be better if it were, you know, edited a little bit. But that is but a minor quibble. Yeah.
Well, we did it.
Yeah. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is part
Epic.
2 of the Midnight Oil Chronology. Thank you so much for joining us. Peter, thank you for doing this with me.
Not a problem.
And come back next week, and Peter and I are going to very quickly do a studio albums ranked on the Midnight Oil catalogue. We're not going to go into detail on the albums again. That's what we've done in these 2 shows.
Yeah.
But we're just going to do a quick ranking. I have a feeling from this chat, particularly tonight, that our rankings are going to be quite different from each other's.
Yes.
But that's great. I love it when our rankings, when I do a ranking show with somebody and our rankings are completely different from each other.
Have we ever had a ranking where we've actually lined up yet? I don't think we have.
Probably
in any of our
not.
shows.
But
makes it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So watch out for that one next week. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted. So if you want to see any of my other special episodes, there's a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, there's a playlist for those. If you want to see my appearances on other channels like Rock Daydream Nation, there's also a playlist for those. If you're not already subscribed to Rock Daydream Nation, please make sure you do that as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
See you later.